morning.
Before we begin our forum today, this is September 11th. I wonder if we just might have a moment of silence to remember that day and to remember all the death and the harm that has resulted then and in consequence. So, could you just have a moment of silence? Thank you. Today, we have one of those topics that I really love. I hope you do. We're talking about religion and politics. And we have, I think, three wonderful representatives today to discuss that topic. Coming out of the Mormon Church is Senator Jerry Lewis. And we look forward very much to your comments. And then coming out of the Baptist Church and that great Anabaptist tradition and the African American community, we have the Reverend Karen Stewart of First Institutional. And then coming out of the tradition of humanism and addressing the issue of politics, Sherrod Lane, who is the Executive Director of the Secular Coalition of Arizona. Let me say how delighted we are that each of you is present today. We certainly look forward to our time with you, and I think this is going to be a great day. Let me introduce first Senator Lewis, who is married to the former Janet Merkley of Lake Oswego, Oregon. They are the parents of 7 beautiful children and 7 incredible and beautiful grandchildren. Jerry was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. He served a 2-year church mission to Hong Kong, China, and then graduated with his bachelor's and master's degrees in accounting from Brigham Young University. He was a senior tax manager with the accounting firm Deloitte and Touche. Okay, good. Chief Operating Officer for Quorum International Limited. Teacher with CES. Chief Executive Officer for TJ Development Incorporated, and is presently serving as the Chief Executive Officer for Sequoia Choice Schools, LLLP. He's also the Senator from Legislative District 18 in Mesa, Arizona. As a Senator, he serves on the following committees: Appropriations, Border Security, Federalism and States' Rights, Education and Economic Development and Jobs Creation. Jerry has served in many church, civic, and community organizations and is currently a member of the Executive Committee of the Boy Scouts of America Grand Canyon Council. He has ran 7 marathons, wow, in the last 2 years, and just completed the Boston Marathon in April.
Wow.
Impressive. We've asked our speakers to speak for 10 to 12 minutes so we can hear each of them, and then we'll have a time for questions and open discussions. And I'll introduce each of our speakers before they speak. So, Senator Lewis, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege of being with you all today. I hope this works. If not, that's fine. I'll talk as loud as I can. As I looked out the window of the Capitol today and saw the flag at half-mast, I had forgotten for just one moment that the day was 9/11. It's just early rising and had meetings all morning long, and I saw the flag there at half-mast, perfectly still, gray morning, totally uncharacteristic for Arizona this time of the year. And if you'll recall, 9/11, that fateful day, it was very bright and sunny that day. And I thought how fitting that there stands the emblem of our freedom. And been asked to speak about Mormonism's take on political and politics and so forth. And perhaps the easiest way to introduce this topic is to read a very short statement from the church. It's the official statement that one can find on the church's website. It's entitled Political Neutrality. The church's mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, not to elect politicians. And we can leave it there, and then we can pass the mic over and be edified by that, I'm sure. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is neutral in matters of party politics. And you say, well, gee, I thought you were all Republicans. Well, ask Harry Reid if that's true. And ask the senator from American Samoa, or the representative from American Samoa, if that's true. And ask the McKay family if that's true. And they'll tell you, absolutely not. There's a lot of Mormons that are from all parties. And I have my daughter and son-in-law are now looking into other parties, independents, and other different groups because they feel that their needs aren't being served by either party at this point in time. We're free thinking, and we're not coerced one way or the other. This applies in all the many nations in which it is established. The church does not endorse, promote, or oppose political parties, candidates, or platforms. I wish they would have endorsed me. I wish they would have done something. I was accused by my opponent in the recall election of having the church's support and whatnot. I wish I did. It would have made things a lot easier. But if you look at the polling that was done 4 days before our election on November 8th, the independent poll by ABC 15 and I forget, I think it's Capital Times, they asked people on this election if you're Mormon, and the Mormon vote was split 50-50. So it was indicative, I think, of the way people vote. They don't. The bishops or stake presidents don't get up and tell you how to vote, what issues to stand for. As Joseph Smith taught, we teach the people correct doctrine and let them govern themselves. And the church tries to maintain that neutrality in all things. Church does not allow its church buildings, membership lists, or other resources to be used for partisan political purposes. So you won't see a district meeting for the Democratic Party, the Republican Party at the church. You will see voting booths there because that's just complete as a bipartisan effort. Church does not attempt to direct its members as to which candidate or party they should give their votes to. This policy applies whether or not a candidate for office is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or not. Church does not attempt to direct or dictate to a government leader. And so when I was serving my first term, I didn't get calls from Salt Lake City saying, hey, vote for this way. They stay out of it entirely. And in fact, even bringing it up to any general authority, okay, a person that would be recognized as to the world as a leader of the church, they quickly change the subject. They say, well, that's good. Pray about that and think about that and ponder it over and make your own choice on that because this is your thing. It's not ours. The church does, however, encourage its members to play a role as responsible citizens in their communities, including becoming informed about issues and voting in elections. And so what's interesting is every election season, there will be a letter read in the sacrament meetings of the church that says, this coming Tuesday, or on Tuesday, November 6th, there will be an election. We encourage you to study the issues, to study the candidates, and make yourself aware of both so that you can make an intelligent vote. That's the extent of the reminder. Church does expect its members to engage in the political process in an informed and civil manner. You might not believe that with some of the stuff you saw in East Valley last November, but most of the time that's generally adhered to. Respecting the fact that members of the church come from a variety of backgrounds and experiences, and they have differences of opinions in partisan political matters. And I have people in my own congregation, which we call a ward, who are very, very, very blue Democrats. And I have others that are very, very red Republicans, and a lot in between, independents. And so we don't get up in our church meetings and preach any one party's platforms or anything like that. And if someone tries to, some people are lay ministry, sometimes people don't understand this, the bishop will actually tap on the shoulder and say, this is not the place for this type of thing. It doesn't happen too often, but if it does, the bishop is there to make sure that it doesn't. The church does request candidates for office not to imply that their candidacy or platforms are endorsed by the church. And I think that's what kind of hurt my opponent last year, is I think statement was made to that effect, and people said, wait a minute, that's totally contrary to the principles set out in the political neutrality statement. And as I said earlier, it would be nice if they would, from a very selfish standpoint, but from a very, very gracious standpoint, they don't. The church does reserve the right as an institution to address, in a nonpartisan way, issues that it believes have significant community or moral consequences or that directly affect the interests of the church. So occasionally we'll see the church come out, as they did here with Prop 102, on what they would consider a moral issue and get behind or line up against a particular moral issue. In the United States, where nearly half of the world's Latter-day Saints live, it is customary for the church at each national election to issue a letter to be read to all congregations, encouraging its members to vote, but emphasizing the church's neutrality in partisan political matters. Relationships with government, elected officials who are Latter-day Saints make their own decisions and may not necessarily be in agreement with one another, or even with the publicly stated church position. While the church may communicate its views to them, as it may to any other elected official, it recognizes that these officials still must make their own choices based on their best judgment and with consideration to constituencies whom they were elected to represent. And that's as much as I'll read out of it. That's the gist of it. And I will tell you that I appreciate the fact that we do retain that neutrality. And the church goes out of its way to make sure that we understand that as elected officials. And I see my brother Cecil Ash walking in the room, which I'm sure he could corroborate everything that I've said here before. But most importantly, the church recognizes that if we want to have good government, we have to be actively involved. We believe that governments were instituted by God to help create environments where people can worship, can actualize, and can be a contributing part to the societies in which they live. Thank you very much.
Next, we have the Reverend Karen Stewart. She's a graduate of Ottawa University, Golden Gate Theological Seminary, and holds a certificate in nonprofit management from Arizona State University. She also majored in that in her theological program. A member of First Institutional Baptist Church, she has worked there directing children and youth and young adult ministries, and has held a number of posts in that church in working with children, youth, and young adults. In the city of Phoenix, she has served on the Committee for Faith-Based Development and on the Steering Committee for Families First, a collaboration with the Arizona Department of Economic Security. Currently, she serves as a board member for Rainbow Acres, an American Baptist ministry for developmentally disabled adults, and serves as the faith-based representative for the Central Phoenix First Things First Regional Council. Born in Japan as the youngest of 5 children, she was raised in Arizona and has lived here for the majority of her life. Reverend Stewart.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, to Dr. Paul Emiker, to my colleagues here on the panel. Greetings and God's blessings be upon each one of you. I thank you for the invitation to speak on the topic of religion and politics, and more specifically, the African American church and politics. I must say, though, that I feel extremely underqualified to address this topic, as I am neither a historian nor am I a politician. However, in this aggressive and oftentimes mean-spirited political climate that grows even more malicious as we move closer to our November elections, I feel it's imperative that the church is heard. So although I do offer my lack of expertise in both history and politics as a disclaimer, amen, I am grateful for the opportunity to say a word on behalf of the African American Church. I want to say at the outset that I felt it best as my point of departure to talk a little bit about the African American Church's history in politics, because I think that will set up the framework for where we are today. And also note that Baptist churches are autonomous. So the church that I am a member of, the congregation that I serve, where my husband, Dr. Stewart, serves as a senior pastor, although we choose not to ever endorse an actual candidate, there might be other Baptist churches that do, because they follow the leadership of their pastor. So let's get a little bit into the history of the African American church as it relates to politics. The African American Church and its resulting political movement was born out of the government and the society that endorsed and practiced slavery and segregation. So historically, the church in the African American community was connected to politics because of these two institutions. Because African Americans were prohibited from developing or participating in the mainstream church and other institutions in this country, the African American church became the channel for most, if not all, of our political activities. So born out of struggle and oppression, the African American church was the first organized institution during and after slavery and has been a hub and catalyst for African American political activity up until the present for the most part. Many Negro spirituals, although religious in content, made reference to the activities that were the backbone of the freedom movement. Swing low, sweet chariot, steal away, wade in the water. These were not only songs about having faith in God, but they also contained hidden messages for slaves to run to freedom. The African American church, often referred to as the invisible church during slavery due to our inability to meet, was so connected to the fight for freedom and human rights that it was innate to the church's existence. And this fight continued throughout Reconstruction, it continued in segregation in the Jim Crow era, it continued through the Civil Rights Movement. It is a fight we continue to fight for today. The church became a safe haven for religious and social and political activity. In fact, references to going to a church meeting implied that there was some political action that was to be undertaken. Religion became a metaphor for freedom and salvation, community, and activism. Political action and Christian responsibility were virtually synonymous. Quoting directly from Misty Johnson's thesis entitled, "The Black Church and Political Mobilization of African Americans," she writes, "During segregation, the institution increased the power of the group by mobilizing the community towards insisting upon equal rights. Its social and communication networks provided members with social capital, the tools necessary to be able to coordinate political activities in the Black community. It is one of the few institutions in the Black community that is built, financed, and controlled by African Americans. Because of this, the Black church held a unique institutional and political position as an integral part of the Black community's development and progress. Due to the Black church's prominence and position in the community, well-known Black religious leaders throughout history have been able to build a sense of community and group identity as well. This was apparent during the Civil Rights Movement. During this time, the Black church's influence increased and its political leaders became important politically. Prominent figures such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and Ralph Abernathy are a few examples of religious leaders in Black community who became politically active because of their church affiliation. The activism of these leaders in the Black church became an institution of hope, faith, and unity for African Americans. Statistically, there has been an increase in the amount of Black clergy and Black church leaders among elected officials. Traditionally, the Black clergy were some of the most educated and articulate people in the community and were natural leaders. People looked to them for leadership, not just in religious matters, but in all areas of life. It has been noted that the speaking style of Black politicians has been influenced by the cadence, repetition, and rhythmic delivery of the Black preacher. Many African American leaders sprung from the ranks of the church, beginning with their political constituency with their congregations and their districts. During the Civil Rights Movement, other religious leaders like Adam Clayton Powell and E.L. Franklin encouraged their congregations to protest unfair treatment such as the denying of African Americans their voting rights. And more closely to home, our own local pastor and political advocate, Dr. Warren H. Stewart Sr., has led many political movements here in the state of Arizona, starting with and leading the fight for King Holiday through his current leadership, serving as the chairman of the board of the National Immigration Forum, based in Washington, D.C. Johnson, who was quoted earlier, goes on to say, studies have shown that high levels of attendance at politically active churches made African Americans more politically active, primarily where congregations heard political announcements and religious messages about political issues. These churches encourage members to be politically active. Having just returned from our National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated in 2012, its annual session held in Atlanta, Georgia, it was announced that not only our convention's president, Dr. Julius Scruggs, but the leaders of 4 other major Baptist conventions, along with the NAACP, will be uniting together to counter new voter ID laws, as well as pushing to increase voter registration amongst African Americans. This movement is also being supported by AMEs and Church of God in Christ and other non-denominational African American Christians throughout the United States. As was stated earlier, the African American Church remains connected to fight for freedom and human rights. Again, it is innate to our church's existence. Over the past week, I have heard words from the prophet Micah quoted from across the pulpit to African American Christians in Phoenix, Atlanta, and from around our country. These words best symbolize the mandate to political activity. Quoting Micah 5:24, it reads, "But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." It is a call for justice that prompts the African American Church to stay politically active, having lived through injustices done to us individually and as a people, even in 2012, even with an African American in the White House. A call to do justice in these United States and abroad remains. I believe that until this verse is fulfilled for not just every American, but for every person created in God's image and likeness, the African American Church nor the African American preacher pastor will be out from God's call to do justice. These African American pastors and preachers, stand as modern-day prophets to our political system, heralding the call for justice to the poor and the downtrodden, justice for the least, the left out, and the lost. And until equity is reached for all, the African American Church will remain a part of our political system.
Thank you, Reverend. Our third speaker is Sarah Lane. She's the Executive Director of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, where she advocates for Arizona's atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other free thinkers at the state capitol. Lane has been an active member of the Arizona non-theistic community since moving to the state in 2009, and is the organizer of the Prescott Freethinkers, Flagstaff Freethinkers, and Sedona Verde Valley Freethinkers. Lane founded the Secular Student Alliance at Prescott College, where she studied social ethics and studied on the inaugural board of the Secular Coalition for Arizona. Lane also serves on the board of Prescott Pride Center and is a hospice volunteer. She lives in Flagstaff with her 2 children and dog. We welcome you.
I'm glad I get to do this sitting down because I sometimes forget to breathe when I'm doing public speaking, and so there's, short distance to fall. Which is why I brought my assistant. I don't know if that counts against my 10 minutes if I'm unconscious. Okay. Well, I really appreciate the invitation to speak to the interfaith movement. I really have a deep love of interfaith collaboration, going back to some of my earliest memories of my parents. My dad was a United Methodist minister, and my mom, who went through many different faith transitions throughout her life, at the end of her life was practicing as a Hasidic Jew in a Lubavitch community. So, as you can imagine, they had some serious and substantial differences in terms of what they taught us about religious truth. But they were also both lifelong advocates for dialogue and collaboration across ideological lines, both politically and religiously. So I grew up understanding that regardless of our faith or non-belief differences, human beings have many, many shared values. And even when we do have those serious and substantial differences, we can find ways to be in relationship and to collaborate towards a better world. So conversations like this one, where we talk about our religious differences and our shared values, and the collaborative process that is politics and democratic government, these conversations are really important because they get us to that place of collaboration, while at the same time honoring our very important differences. So, as the executive director of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, I get to have conversations like this quite a lot because my organization is advocating for a community that in many ways defines itself as in opposition to religious belief. So there's an immediate ideological divide between the sizable minority that makes up the non-theistic community and people of faith who are in the majority in government and society. And I'm often talking to legislators who unfortunately believe that faith is such a fundamental part of the American way of life that non-religious people are in some way a threat to American culture. So in representing atheists and agnostics and humanists, I publicly and actively reject the idea that we somehow cannot be citizens or patriots or moral leaders in our community without religious faith. And I highlight the reality that religious and non-religious Americans do share ideals and values and political concerns. So the politics I engage in as a humanist is really in itself an exercise in interfaith dialogue and collaboration. And before I go further, because this is an interfaith forum and because this has implications in terms of how humanists do politics, I want to emphasize that humanism itself is not a religion and it is not a faith. It's a philosophy. Some people like to call it a life stance, and that affirms the inherent dignity and worth of the human person. So there are both secular humanists and religious humanists, and most religions have overlapping tenets to the humanist philosophy. So while humanism is not a religion, like religious people, many humanists do organize into moral communities that support one another and work toward common social and political goals, and that ponder the important questions about meaning and purpose and how we ought to live. The flourish makes it funny, otherwise it's just embarrassing. So humanists do this organizing and activism and pondering with an emphasis on human reason and on the idea that the scientific method is the best way we have of discerning truth about the natural world that we find ourselves in. And we emphasize that any particular belief we have or assertion we make can always be refined or refuted as we learn more and as the body of scientific knowledge grows. So in contrast, faith is a non-rational way of knowing. And I want to be clear that I don't mean irrational. Irrational implies in contradiction to reason, whereas non-rational is just any non-cognitive mental process. So art, for example, appeals to our emotions and it's inspirational and it's powerful, and those are all non-rational experiences. And so religious faith is similar. We can have really exciting reason-based conversations about religious faith, but the faith itself is something beyond reason that transcends reason, which is what makes it faith. So this distinction is important when we're talking about politics because religious faith does not need to have verifiable reasons. It doesn't need to be evidence-based. It doesn't need to be the same for every person in a country or a state. It can even be completely ineffable and still be very meaningful and useful to the people who have that faith. But public policies, on the other hand, do need to have verifiable reasons, and they do need to be evidence-based, and they do need to be valid for everyone, regardless of religious belief or non-belief. And of course, they have to be ethical, because we can't discuss their merits if there are no words to talk about what we're legislating. So, humanists participate in political advocacy with the goal of improving liberty, dignity, and well-being for everyone, regardless of belief or non-belief. And we insist on the language of rationality and equality in policy, not the language of faith. So one of the primary things that we advocate for in order to secure that well-being for all is a wall of protection between religion and government. so that government does not infringe on our liberty to live according to the dictates of our conscience, particularly in regard to how or if we worship. And so that religion does not use the authority of government to make all of society conform to one particular moral code based on one particular religious belief, because that's tyranny and it's antithetical to human freedom. So humanists see the intrusion of religion into civil government as an assault on religious liberty and a tool for individual faith groups to oppress people they don't agree with. We've seen this happen historically when biblical justification was used as a political argument in favor of maintaining slavery, in denying women the vote, and in modern times suggesting that gay and lesbian people are unworthy of civil marriage contracts. My first experience with political advocacy was actually on gay and lesbian marriage equality, and I think it's a good anecdote to illustrate why we have to transcend religious difference in the political process. Why government needs to be a secular body that represents all of us, not just those of us who happen to share the religious beliefs of the people in power. So I was lobbying with my religious congregation at the time, First UU Baltimore, and we were meeting with our representative, who is a Catholic, and she shared many of our values on other issues, including education, employment opportunities, women's rights, and so on. But on the marriage equality issue, she kept saying, "My faith won't allow me to take that step. I just believe that God sanctioned marriage to be between a man and a woman." And that was a conversation stopper, because there's no way to have a conversation about what policies are good for people when the language of reason is rejected for what a particular person or faith group believes God says. So here I was lobbying with one religious group that firmly believes that the marriages of LGBT people are as valuable and valid as those of straight people. And our representative was essentially asserting that her religious belief about marriage trumped ours. And that was a defining moment for my understanding of why public policy cannot use explicitly religious tenets to dictate statutes, and why the humanist approach to politics has to involve advocacy for secular government. The conversation we were having with our representative should not have been about our religion versus her religion. It should have been about what's fair for everyone, regardless of religious belief or non-belief, and what kinds of policies facilitate free religious expression without that expression infringing on the rights of others. So let me be clear though, in the Catholic Church, in a country like ours, where government is secular and religion is free, the Catholic Church absolutely has the right to say, in the Catholic religion, marriage is between a man and a woman. And the Unitarian Universalist Association absolutely has the right to say, in our religion, gender is not relevant to the definition of marriage. And the civil government should not choose to prefer the religious tenets of either, but should facilitate the freedom of both. And so in a democratic country, where government is secular and religion is free, civil marriage contracts issued by the civil government must be equal for any consenting adults with legal standing, regardless of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or any other differences that are not relevant to the ability to sign a legal contract. And that is just one example of the humanist approach to the political process. The overarching idea being that our pluralistic society is one that humanists treasure. It protects our right to adopt a life stance that we find to be a very satisfying alternative to religious faith, and it protects the rights of others to practice their faith. So we fight to maintain that pluralism and the wall of protection between church and state that allows it to flourish. And we partner with people of faith to engage in this collaborative thing that is politics. And we believe in a collective intelligence that is created when human beings from all different faith and non-belief perspectives work together. That's humanism in politics in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. I hope you noticed that our three speakers stayed within our time constraints very well. That suggests that we're going to have a good conversation, I think. At this point, what we like to do is throw the floor open so that you can make a comment, not a speech. and or raise a question. So do you have comments or questions from our group? Speaker. Yes, Reverend Stewart.
Yes, I have a question first for
Sarah.
about, does the humanist have a position on polygamy?
On polygamy?
Yes.
Well, again, I mean,
Can you repeat the question?
he asked if humanists have a position on polygamy. And humanists, you know, themselves have a number of different positions on a number of different things. But in terms of, you know, civil contracts, if people are not being exploited and you know, adult people have legal standing to sign a legal contract, you know, that's not something that we would suggest government intervene in. But with the exception of where people are exploited, because of course we are all familiar with the stories of polygamy where women and children are being horribly exploited, and of course humanists would take a stand on that.
Now, to Senator Lewis, there's been a lot of conversation. You're pretty loud anyway. There's been a lot of conversation from traditional evangelicals about Mormonism, and for years they had preached against Mormonism, calling the code, etc., etc. But I find it interesting that now denominations that for years have preached against Mormonism are publicly saying they would never support President Obama because of his positions. And they're making a shift all of a sudden because of the marriage issue, the abortion issue. Do you have any comment about this shift that for years they have labeled your faith a cult, but now we have a president who says, I believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, who doesn't agree with him on abortion and same-sex marriage. They are now shifted. I just want to know if you have any comments.
I think one of the first lessons I learned in this political arena in the last now 12 months since I've been involved is that politics makes interesting bedfellows. And people that would not see eye to eye previously in a lot of issues, just you pointed out a very interesting one, all of a sudden now have joined together as allies in a cause. We likewise have a history of politics in the LDS faith. Joseph Smith himself actually ran for president prior to his martyrdom, and I believe it's from those already underpinnings of the church's history that we have this feeling of being involved. We are often misunderstood in a lot of things. This is just one of those areas. But I credit the ecumenical movement of the United States for a lot of the erasing of some of those opinions, where people like all of you here today come to hear and listen. I was sharing with someone earlier today about a friend that I saw at the Capitol today. One of her missions is to fight Islam, and she's got her own little jihad going. And I get occasionally all these emails from her people, and they're nonsense. They really are nonsense. And if there's any truth involved in it all, I still take it with a serious dose of salt. My position, and I believe the position of members of my church in many cases, we all think for ourselves, is that we want to understand truth wherever it's found. And we believe that truth is found throughout the universe. And as we seek to understand truth by getting to know people, understanding them, we are better people ourselves. We create a happier society, and we believe that we're achieving the will of God and we're working together rather than against each other. Good question. Thank you.
Right here.
My question is addressed to the legislator. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Jerry Lewis.
Okay. You may recall decades ago, Justice Brennan of our Supreme Court, who was a Catholic, voted many, many times in cases that came before him, taking positions that were directly contrary to his church. Okay? Can you imagine yourself taking a position on a piece of legislation that would be directly contrary to the teachings of your church? And can you answer this question in a simple yes or no?
Yes, I can, and yes,
Okay.
I could.
Okay, this is on the record, folks.
If I could add, I go back to John Kennedy's speech. He wasn't running for Pope, he was running for president. I'm not running for bishop or stake president, I've already been that. I'm now running to be a legislator, and I think some would say that I contradicted my faith's beliefs in this most recent legislative session when I voted against the contraception bill, which I thought was not in line with anything that I felt was important and should be a topic of discussion in a legislative body such as ours. And I took a lot of flack from some of the people in my own faith, and certainly with my own party. So I think I've already demonstrated that I can and in fact have.
Yeah, I could not get Ken Bennett to give the same answer you just did.
And that goes to my point that in the church, everybody gets to think and make their own decisions. We believe that we have our own agency.
I'm addressing everybody in the room. Thank all these people. I think if we sit here and really resolve this right down to the bottom, we are all saying the same thing. That it doesn't matter what building you're in to worship, but what's in your heart and what you feel is God, no matter what name you call him by, the way that should go. My comment to everybody is, all the emails that I get are so vile. The comments in a gathering outside of a room like this are so antagonistic. And that's what I keep hearing, and I don't hear us speaking out. But I think that's because of the kind of people we are. We're not argumentative. We don't want to attack anybody else. We are not voting against something. We are voting for something. And I just hope that our voice can gently go out into the environment so that those people that are kind of sitting on the fence and say, well, nobody thinks the way I do, let them know there's a lot of people that are thinking the way they do.
Other comments, questions?
Very quick comment, if you don't mind. I would love to see more political discussion, like what you're having here, where people can sincerely disagree, very vehemently disagree on issues, but we can do it civilly and have a conversation and understand where everybody is coming from. To that point, I'd like to ask you, how do you look at the secular versus the religious? Some of you touched on that, but maybe sharpen up your perspectives. Where does religion end and secularism start? And how do we keep secularism from becoming a de facto state religion? Because they can't look at the Soviet Union.
Well, at some of our humanist society meetings, we have very lively discussions about what religion even is. And, you know, there's ethical culture, for example, which is a humanist religion. What makes that different than just a humanist society? And it's a complicated question. I don't think that secularism itself, I can see humanism becoming a religion. It has tenets. Secularism is just the idea of religious neutrality. It's, you know, not favoring one religion over the other. It's not. I'm not advocating for an atheistic government. I don't want, you know, communist Russia. I want government neutrality on the issue of religion. So.
I would just answer very quickly. My faith informs, but does not dictate my politics. And I think that's probably the way it should be. It is a government, it is not a congregation.
And my faith is innate to who I am, which is why I'm not a politician.
Yes, I have a comment for each of the guests. I'm going to identify you by your organizations because I'm afraid I have a terrible memory for names. To the representative from the Secular Coalition, I'd like to point out, and I was happy to hear you say you do have members who are of the theistic community, because the principle in this country is separation of church and state, not separation of religion and society. And the whole reason we have this principle is so all of us can be free to practice our own beliefs as we see fit. To the representative from the Baptists, I'd like to point out that it was the treatment, or to be more precise, the mistreatment of the Baptists in Virginia that led Jefferson and Madison to be such powerful advocates of separation of church and state. And to the legislator, urging your people to address moral issues is very good, but unfortunately, that is a loophole in the separation of church and state. You can literally drive a Mack truck through. There was a time when it was argued in this country that in order to be a good representative of government, you had to have good moral values which were proven by being a Christian. You still hear people say you should only vote for a Christian for government. Our founders rejected that. Article 6, paragraph 3 of the Constitution expressly says no religious test for public office. And I think that principle can be broadened to the idea that purely moral issues should be addressed by society, not by the government. I have no more right to have laws passed imposing Jewish kosher laws on Mormons than Mormons have the right to have laws passed imposing their moral values on me.
Keep going. Sure. Yeah.
I really want to say thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion. And Senator Lewis, I am originally from England, but I went to the University of Utah, and I learned more about the church and politics today than I have ever. So thank you so much. And I am delighted to know that stance. I really am delighted to know the LDS church's stance. That makes me very happy. Thank you very much for your wonderful talk as well, and thank you for where my heart is and where my heart aligns, and so much as being more theistic. I think now humanism, interfaith humanism, humanist, that's it. And to the lovely lady over here, with your question, you know, I'm on Facebook a lot, and I've had those posts, and I've had those things, and I did take a stand. Someone posted something that was really negative about a particular candidate on my page, and I took it down, but I made a comment as to why I took it down after I had watched it. And I said that I really believe in inclusion and peace and love and tolerance, that each person has to come from their own place to align with what they believe is for the highest and best for all concerned in our country. I wrote a long post. People shared it on their pages. People liked it. So I think we do have more of a voice than we think, without aligning, without saying necessarily who we align for, but just standing up. I also think in our current political system that we have some people that have stood up for what they believe, regardless of it being popular. And I commend that. And I commend you, Senator Lewis, for standing up for what you believe in your heart, even when it does go against your own faith tradition.
I'd like to add, though, they say that negative attack ads do more to influence the society in the way it votes. So, everywhere I go, I hear people say, I just can't stand those ads. And yet we continue. They continue. So something's got to change somewhere, because they do more to influence the vote than the lovely ones that actually talk about the issues. So there is something that we are called to do to make a difference for these politicians who believe that me shooting down my opponent is what's going to get me the race.
Yeah, if I could speak to that too, I really love what you did on Facebook. I mean, the internet is a horrible place for inequality. It's ridiculous. But I think taking stands like that, when we see those posts and those emails, I recently had somebody share on my Facebook page one of the videos of Governor Brewer during an interview where she sort of lost her place and had this long embarrassing pause for several minutes. and the person who posted it, made some mean comments about her, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I actually just had a video of me giving a speech where I had my friend edit out the pause that I took because it was, we're all human. I think that's a very humanizing moment. And certainly I disagree with her politically, but she's a person, and as a humanist, we need to be using humanizing language in all of our conversations. I have to first recognize the humanity of the person I'm speaking to, or we're never going to get anywhere. And I think that that's something that's really common in most of the faith traditions. I know that my dad articulates it, seeing the divinity in every person, that we all have a piece of God within us, and looking at everybody as a child of God. And I look at everybody as someone with great human potential. And I think that taking those stands and just continuing to use transformative dialogue is very powerful. So, yeah.
To that point also, how we stand for what we stand for is every bit as important as that for which we stand. Sorry, you stand so many times there. But there was once a lesson I learned in becoming a teacher. And you took a beautiful cake in front of your students. And usually it was, before lunch, and they were all hungry, they were salivating, and they saw that beautiful cake, and they go, how many of you like this cake? How many of you like a piece of cake? Everybody's hand goes up. Well, what would you like? Oh, geez, I love chocolate, I love the double-decker, I love the frosting, I love all this other stuff. This is great. I said, yeah, wouldn't you just love to have a piece? Who would raise your hand for a piece? Everyone raised their hand. Well, I'll choose you. Come on here. And I take that beautiful cake and I go, here. Now you want it? Now, the cake was still a good cake. The message is great, but how I delivered it was abysmal and offensive. And so though we may have positions that make a lot of sense and that have been around for many, many years and may be universal principles that we could all agree upon, if my way of delivering it is offensive, then I'm not going to have a real good chance of marketing it or selling it to anybody that could use it. And I believe we've got to end the vitriol. Yes, we need to have impassioned debate, but it can be done, contrary to what some people think, in a civil manner, without attacking individuals, and instead attacking the issue. And if we could, as a society, get past the idea of wanting to watch, boxing matches down at the Capitol, and really push our legislators and elected officials to work on the issues, not work on attacking one another, I think would go a long way. And just a parenthetical note, sometimes we get accused of doing things as politicians that we didn't do, okay? And there's a lot of negatives. There just was a quote yesterday in a not so widely published publication called The Yellow Sheet, which said that my campaign was going to attack my opponent's voting record. Well, we don't have any plan to do that at all. But I was quoted by someone that's very close to the campaign. I thought, you know what? This is not my style. I will not attack my opponent and attack my opponent in the recall election, because I believe in my heart of hearts that it's counterproductive to use what I consider the tools of the adversary to do the work of the Lord.
To follow up on the statement made by my brother here about morality and faith, I want to ask the three of you. If our faith does not provide us this nation of morals, and we have different faith, then to whom do we lead to define and determine what is moral and what is immoral?
Well, so humanists believe that we can discern morality from natural reason, that we don't need supernatural guidance in that regard. But I think that the principles humanists come up with are very similar to the principles that people of faith come up with. And those principles principles can stand by themselves. I mean, the golden rule doesn't need all of the theology around it to explain to a kid why it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. So certainly faith and religion and the services we have and the rituals we use inspire us to act on those morals, but I think that we evolved to be compassionate and collaborative. It helps our survival. We do better when we work together. So I think that those moral truths are accessible to everybody regardless of belief or non-belief.
And this is probably where you and I disagree, because I believe that compassion is not an evolutionary trait. That it is something that is taught, that we are created in the image and likeness of God, and that we look to God. And for me, out of my Christian tradition, I look to the scriptures to find what morality is and how I am to live out my faith. So it's very, very clear in that it needs to be taught from generation to generation. I recognize, though, that people have used the Bible, and religious tradition to be oppressive, divisive, and that is not in line with the Christianity that I know. So when I see that, I have to be just as vehemently against that kind of oppression, using religion to oppress people, because that is not, God wants us to be free and liberated, and therefore,
my response also before this question, truth is truth, okay, and it can be circumscribed into one great whole, okay. We find truth everywhere. We can't change the truth. The truth exists, it's eternal, and if it's not eternal, it's not truth. It's just a policy or something else. And so, although we can't change the truth, we should be seeking for the truth in all things. And if we don't agree with the truth, or if we don't agree with what people think is the truth, well then I think we need to be tolerant and listen to one another to try to understand, is this really true? We also need to respect the fact that if something is true, by a majority, we can't vote it out of truth. Truth is eternal. We've got to admit that. And if we need to redefine something so that it fits within the essence of truth, then so be it. But let's not try to call truth something other than what it really is. Let's make sure that those principles that are eternal, that can be described as truth, are maintained and defended. And let's be tolerant of those who may disagree with us, because that's the truth also, is that intolerance is not going to solve anything. It's only going to create greater hard feelings and lead to greater distress in the society.